Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. Ukraine War News Update, third partner off for the 11th of February 2025. We have a geopolitical update concerning the war in Ukraine, and most of it will centre around the US because there's all sorts of talk to do with peace plans, demands for rare earth metals, and all sorts going on. And actually, that's left very little bandwidth, I think, for neighbouring countries, the EU, UK, other nations to be making any posture at the moment. We're going to start with Trump ending. We're going to start with this because I think it sets up Trump's approach to Ukraine. Now, you already know that I'm not a big fan of Trump, but one of the reasons I'm not a fan of Trump is because he doesn't appear to have any clear morality. Right, every decision he makes, and this isn't just me trying to trash Trump, but we need to understand why he's making decisions like this, right? This doesn't come out of a vacuum. Okay, so he doesn't care for Ukraine. He wants to end the war because he says there's deaths on both sides. It's too many deaths, and it needs to stop. It needs to stop right now. But he doesn't say it needs to be a just ending to the war. There needs to be fairness for Ukraine. He says there needs to be fairness for both sides, even though one side has attacked, invaded another, done all sorts of war crimes and killed all sorts of people. He never criticizes Russia, and we'll come on to this in a little bit, because actually he's criticizing Ukraine at the moment implicitly without saying anything about Russia. So it's very clear that he doesn't really have any moral fiber. And again, I'm not trying to be critical. You tell me where his morality is here, where he is just saying, like, so the decision that he's made is ending Ukraine's steel import tariff exemption 2 months early. So there was already an exemption in place to help Ukraine with their economy by being able to have tariff-free exports of their steel. Now remember that Prokrovsk coke miners just shut down. They're struggling with their steel industry. They don't have any coking mine at all in Ukraine. So they need all the help they can get. And Trump has just gone, your exemption is ended. I'm not just not going to renew it. I'm going to end it early. I'm going to go out of my way to make it more difficult for Ukraine, economically speaking. Now, you can say that it's in line with putting tariffs on European and international steel, but this is going out of his way to make it more difficult for Ukraine. US President reinstates a 25% tariff. So he's not just stopping the exemption, he's then ramping up the tariffs to 25% on steel imports starting in March, ending Biden's exemption meant to support the war-affected economy. Okay, then there is the looming trade war with the EU. And Ursula von der Leyen's come out and said, I deeply regret the US decision to impose tariffs on European steel and aluminium exports. The EU will act to safeguard its economic interests. We will protect our workers, businesses and consumers. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there, but it's going to be painful for both sides, for the whole world, actually. Even, when there's a trade war between two entities, it actually reverberates around the world. Prices go up, and there's a trade war is not good for anyone. Okay, so this trade war appears to be, this is one of the many facets of a trade war that Trump appears to be wanting to start with pretty much everyone, apart from Russia, weirdly. So we'll see how that develops. Now, voices are growing, says Anton Gerashchenko, stronger, that it supposedly makes no sense for Putin to end the war, that sanctions are not working, and that Trump has no real leverage to bring Putin to the negotiating table. In fact, that's not true. There are very effective leverages, arguments and signals to enforce peace. Increase weapons deliveries to Ukraine. A large supply of missiles will drive Russian logistics 250 to 300 kilometers back from the front lines and destroy Russian air bases, ammunition warehouses, and other military objects in this radius, significantly impacting Russia's ability to wage the war. Supplying a few Patriots. Sanctions against Russia's shadow fleet, sanctions against Russian oil, disconnection from the Russian power grid. When you see reports that Russia is stronger than ever and Ukraine and the West have already lost, the source of these reports is obvious. It might not be a good idea to look where something in Russia has been blown up, sanctioned or bankrupted. So the US has an incredible amount of potential and power right now to absolutely sink Russia. So it's really interesting that all the rhetoric is about extracting and exploiting Ukraine, and nothing is being said about Russia. And I know there are some of you out there that still think Trump is magnificent and the one for, Ukraine. Andy S. and other people just can't handle any criticism against Trump. But the thing is, you need to listen to actually what he says and what he doesn't say. So he never criticizes Russia. He's never threatening Russia at the moment. He's threatening Ukraine. He's threatening Europe. He's threatening all his allies. This tells you everything you need to know. If he's getting rid of tariff exemptions from Ukraine early, he's going out of his way to make it difficult for Ukraine. Meanwhile, he's sending envoys on the slide to Moscow to have talks with Putin. So the US envoy was in Moscow today holding talks with the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister. Russia's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova later said the meeting focused on activities of foreign institutions. Meaningless guff that is. So the Gulfstream private jet linked to Steve Witkoff, who is the special envoy also to the Middle East too, landed in Moscow. So there were discussions taking place, bilateral discussions that didn't involve Europe, didn't involve Ukraine, and this is a big problem. And there is a tension there. Now, it appears that there is a realization maybe Europe has complained to Trump, because we then hear that the US is now to consult allies on the Ukraine peace plan, seeking European arms purchases for Kyiv. Now, the implication here is that, so I'm speaking on behalf of the US here, if we piss off Europe too much or the EU too much, they're not going to buy stuff from us. So actually, we need to include them in the discussions, not so much because that's the right thing to do, but transactionally, that is better for us to get money. So the Trump administration has paused the development of a Ukraine peace plan to hold consultations with European allies, according to The Telegraph. But the Kyiv Independent saying US is also exploring ways to continue arming Ukraine without significantly increasing US spending. According to Reuters, one approach reportedly under discussion is encouraging European allies to purchase more American weapons for Kyiv. But I think when you look at a trade war looming with Europe, then I would be very surprised if Europe go, do you know what? Thanks for putting tariffs on steel and aluminium. Let's buy loads of stuff off you. Unless, of course, they can use that as leverage to reduce those tariffs. So there could be a bit of jiggery pokery going on there. Then let's look at what Timothy Milovanov, the former economics minister, he says very good news for Ukraine. Donald Trump's administration has paused its peace plan for Ukraine to give Europe a seat at the negotiating table, according to The Telegraph. General Keith Kellogg said he would seek views on the shape of any peace deal and that governments could contribute to the process in recent talks with European diplomats. Telegraph understands that this will be an offer of continued military support for Kyiv in exchange for access to Ukraine's rare earth resources. So everything that I think we can see the US doing at the moment is really prima facie transactional, that everything will have strings attached. And as I said this morning, those strings are very short. They're not playing a long game. They're not playing a strategic game, and we'll come on to talk about that in a little while. They're not playing the long game. They are playing the very short game, which is we will help you, but we want loads of stuff for helping you. And by the way, let's go on to that now. We'll come on to that. So Trump has yet to outline his plan to end the war in Ukraine, but there are concerns in Kyiv and other European capitals that he could force Ukraine to cede territory in exchange for peace. I don't think the American peace plan is going to be at all beneficial for Ukraine. I don't think they particularly care for Ukraine having a just and sustainable peace. So I think there's going to have to be some hard bargaining from Ukraine. I think there's going to have to be some difficult posturing probably from the EU and European partners, such that they might be trying to advocate, hopefully will try and advocate as much as possible for Ukraine if they are included in these peace talks, as they should be. You can't on the one hand say this is Europe's war, you need to own this, and then say, and by the way, you have nothing to do with the peace talks concerning Ukraine, even though it's your war. We're going to define the peace talks we are going to extract and exploit Ukraine for everything we can get from them, and you can't. Like, this is our business to do that because we've paid overwhelmingly for the support for Ukraine, even though that is not true. This is empirically not true. So Ukraine has, a quote, agreed in principle to give the US access to the extraction of valuable minerals on its territory in exchange for aid. It's about $500 billion equivalent, said Trump. They may agree, they may not, but we will have all this money in Ukraine, and so to speak, I want it back, Trump said, adding that he considered it foolish to continue to help Ukraine for free. So again, this is, I mean, he's telling you himself, like, this is not the long game. He's playing a short game. He's not talking about global chess here, 4D chess over a long period. He's not talking about strategic objectives, geopolitically speaking. He's like, I don't want to pay to help Ukraine unless I'm getting something back right now.
I want to have our money secured because we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars, and you know, they may make a deal, they may not make a deal, they may be Russian someday, or they may not be Russian someday, but we're going to have...
And by the way, that's annoyed a lot of people, that statement there.
All this money in there, and I say, I want it back. And I told...
So the really important part of this that some people have kind of not recognised is that this is not new aid. He wants payment back for aid that has already been given and appropriated through Congress for Ukraine. He now, post facto, wants that back. He's basically given a Christmas present to Ukraine and then demanded money from Ukraine for that Christmas present. Okay, except it's not really a charitable Christmas present. Actually, there are reasons the US has given all that assistance to Ukraine because it's in the US's best interest. But now Trump doesn't understand that, gets into power, and then demands payment for aid that's already been given. I find it quite unconscionable, the positioning of Trump at the moment. I really do object to how he's doing this. I think there's not a shred of morality in that man's body.
I told them that I want the equivalent, like $500 billion worth of rare earth, and they've...
He's a spoilt brat.
Essentially agreed to do that. So at least we don't feel stupid. Otherwise, we're stupid.
Why are you stupid? Like, and this is the idea that he really doesn't understand geopolitics. He's like, we've given them something. I want the exact payment for that back. No, we've given them something because actually it's really useful that Ukraine prevented this war because of X, Y, Z, China, Russia, blah, 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 blah. And Trump's like, oh, I'm sorry, what do you say? Sorry, you started mentioning places I don't even know where they are. So anyway, we've given them some stuff. I want money for it. So give me money.
I said to them, we have to get something. We can't continue to pay this money. You know,
what I'd like is him to be really thoroughly challenged by a reporter, by a journalist, when he says stuff like this. Just say, okay, hang on there. Let's unpick this, Mr. Trump, Mr. President. Let's unpick this because I don't think this stands up, and you are ignoring exactly why Ukraine has been assisted by the United States and all its allies for 3 years. This is not charity, but Trump sees it as charity. He is one of the MAGA, basically your average MAGA Joe, that kind of idea that we've been debunking here for 3 years. That is Trump. That's what Trump believes. Now, as this Ukrainian source says, funny how it never occurs to him to penalize Russia. So all of this is about, and this is what I was hinting at earlier, everything is about getting stuff back from Ukraine. We need to screw Ukraine over for all of this assistance we've given them. Not like, oh, frozen Russian assets, because of course he's just disbanded. Pam Bondi has just disbanded the department that goes after kleptocracy and kleptocrats and oligarchs' assets, foreign assets. He's disbanded that, so he can't like get money from the Russians now because he stopped himself from being able to do that. Absolute insanity. So he just wants to go after the good guys. He wants to go after the EU. He wants to go after Canada. He wants to go after Mexico and Panama and Denmark and Colombia and Ukraine. But doesn't say anything about Russia. As this source says, when Russia is the aggressor and should pay for everything. But no, he wants to extract all the payment he possibly can from Ukraine. So Trump then says, I'm sending Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent to Ukraine to meet President Zelensky. This war must and will end soon. Too much death and destruction. The US has spent billions of dollars globally with little to show. Now, I would absolutely challenge the shit out of what he's just said. And this is what I like. Honestly, Trump is an idiot. He's too ignorant about these things to be in the position he's in, and yet he's in the position he's in, and he's destroying everything like a toddler in a tantrum. It's just absolutely incredible. Like, to think that there's little to show for the billions of dollars that the US has invested. Holy crap. Do you know how much was invested during the entirety of the Cold War? And you've done more damage to Russian power and to the Russian military, full stop, with an incredibly small amount of outlay. Like, that you don't understand that means you need to be hit around the face with a wet fish. You need to wake up to reality, Trump, and you need people around you that are educating you. You are not being educated. You're ignorant and you do not read. Right? So if you don't read, you require information to come at you from what you are seeing on TV. But if you only ever watch Fox News, they are not going to deliver to you what you need. Then you need to get that information from people around you. But the people around you are idiots themselves, or ideologues who are essentially aligned with Russia. And we have a problem here because you live in an information desert, or more like an information poisoned swamp, and this is what happens. This is a result. You vomit insanity like this onto the socials. When America's strong, the world is at peace. Okay, I might not disagree with that, but the US has spent billions of dollars globally with little to show is just flat out wrong. And you know, when people like Andy S continually having a go at me for criticizing Trump, but they're so blind to Trump's idiocy that he can get away with saying anything, and it's perfect, everything Trump. I can't hear you criticize him. Like, come on, get over yourselves and actually listen to what the man says and ask yourself, would you do that if you were really, really pro-Ukraine? Would you say these things? Would you never ever criticize Russia? Would you go out of your way to hit Ukraine with tariffs when their steel industry is absolutely hammered at the moment? Would you stop giving aid to Ukraine and then demand $500 billion worth of rare earth metals, which is like many times the aid that they've actually given? And then that's also to see that Trump misunderstands aid. Like, the book value of a load of equipment isn't you giving $20 billion of equipment. That's the book value of stuff you've already bought and paid for, right? Unless you are going to replace all of that with $20 billion worth of kit, then you need to understand that this isn't just sending money. And Keith Kellogg has just said this, but you don't even seem to understand your own envoy, because you're regurgitating the myths that Keith Kellogg himself tried to dispel the other day by saying, actually, most of the aid that we have given to Ukraine has remained in the US. But you don't understand that, Trump, and you're now demanding that aid times 3, or whatever it is, back from Ukraine in exploited rare earth metals. Now, the US Treasury Secretary, as mentioned, is to visit Ukraine this week for talks on critical minerals, according to Bloomberg. The US Treasury Secretary Bessent will visit Ukraine to discuss that. Okay, now, Trump on Ukraine, there may be Russian someday or there may not. We're going to have all this money in there, and I say I want it back. And again, it's just that demanding petulance that I see from him. So Tatarigami says, based on direct statements from President Trump, Ukraine would be expected to pay back, scare quotes, pay back $500 billion in resources. This was not framed as a trade of new weapons for resources, but rather, as Trump put it, quote, we are going to have all this money and I want it back. Meanwhile, National Security Advisor Waltz has stated that Europe will be fully responsible for Ukraine's security. Paying security guarantees are squarely a European issue. Additionally, Pete Hegseth, so he's the Secretary of Defense, confirmed there will be no US boots on the ground. Ukraine's main problems right now are a shortage of infantry and organizational inefficiencies. The leading cause of casualties on both sides in 2024 and 25 were bomb-dropping drones and FPV kamikaze drones, which the US does not supply. Most drones are acquired through donations, direct unit purchases, Ukrainian funds, or foreign loans and investments. The US does not directly provide these drones. For the cost of one US supplied Switchblade 300 loitering munition, Ukraine could buy approximately 55 to 80 FPV drones, which would be far more effective. Interestingly, I almost shared with you an analysis on the Switchblade and how it's the Switchblade 300, which is a smaller one, and how it's crap, but it costs like something like $75,000, and yet the American armed forces still are ordering them, etc., etc. Anyway, for months, our team has received reports of personnel transfers from air defense, electronic warfare, anti-tank, artillery reconnaissance, and drone units into infantry roles. Some units have been ordered to transfer 50% of the personnel into infantry. In certain cases, Western supplied equipment is not being fully utilized because trained personnel have been reassigned. In this context, adding more overpriced Abrams tanks or Switchblades does little to solve the problem. Yes, Ukraine still needs key systems like HIMARS missiles, artillery shells, intelligence data, Starlink, and other critical assets, but none of this justifies a $500 billion payback, making the proposed deal a terrible one for Ukraine. Without solid security guarantees like NATO or US boots on the ground, the war cannot be stopped, and that's what the US is not going to supply. So Tatragani ends, paper guarantees from the US hold little value, as the Budapest Memorandum has already shown. If Europe is expected to provide Ukraine security, why should Ukraine make a deal with the US at all? And that's my point. That deal over rare earth metals should be done with Europe, especially if the US is saying this is Europe's war. Why not deal directly with Europe on security and resources instead of involving an overpriced middleman? Right now, there are far more questions than answers, but one thing is clear. Washington has no real plan. The current proposals don't position the US as a strategic counter to Russia. Instead, they suggest Russia will retain occupied territories and get sanctions relief, while Ukraine gets pillaged by Trump. I absolutely 100% agree with Tatragani. That's a Ukrainian who knows what he's talking about, giving his opinion there, and that analysis holds in my view. And again, to name people like Andy S, who are like pro-Trump, Trump can do no wrong, he's perfect. Like, just honestly, do you think extracting $500 billion of natural resources out of Ukraine, do you think that's fair? Would you do that if you were a decent, upstanding human being and a leader of the free world? Now, US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth will on Wednesday become the first member of the new Trump administration to visit NATO, where the allies are keen to understand how America plans to influence the course of the war in Ukraine, according to the Washington Post. That's really good. I hope he gets to speak to an awful lot of NATO personnel. Hegseth will first take part in a meeting of the Ukraine Defence Contact Group at NATO's Brussels headquarters, which is being chaired by the UK. Hegseth was not expected to make any announcement on new weapons to Ukraine. It's definitely not thought to be on the cards. Now, this is Hegseth talking, but as Jane Kiev notes here, no one in the Trump administration can even say Russia. Russia doesn't even get mentioned, let alone criticised. Like, again, go just listen to the words. They tell you everything.
But it would be the wrong planning assumption to say, oh, America's abandoning something or America's leaving. No, America's smart to observe, plan, prioritize, and project power where we need to deter conflict. We don't want conflict with China. We don't want the president has ran on being a peace president, and he's delivered that. But being strong, peace through strength, is how you deter that. And we want to posture for that, just like we believe the Europeans, alongside our support, need to on the continent as well.
I don't want to be like ageist against young people, but I just don't think Pete Hegseth is experienced enough. He's not old enough. He's not knowledgeable enough theoretically. I mean, that's one of the massive criticisms from a serviceman I referenced the other day. I showed you part of his video saying that this guy is, what is he, 4 out of 10 up the leadership ladder? Like, he literally hasn't learnt about military theory. Like, to be in charge of the DoD without military theoretical knowledge, and the experience of commanding that many troops is just like he's just not fit for purpose. And interesting that Adam Kinzinger here says, given that, this is Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. Bragg is back. I just signed a memorandum reversing the name of Fort Liberty back to Fort Bragg. So I think that's trying to get back Confederates generals and whatnot as the names on military bases. I presume that's what it is, and that's what he's going on about there, sitting in his baseball cap and jeans and jacket, and you think, yeah, okay, image, blah blah blah, whatever. But I just don't see this guy as Secretary of Defense. Given that this is Hegseth's third tweet about this. And I was wondering exactly this. I'm really interested in Kinzinger saying this, because I was wondering whether he would not really be, he would be Secretary of Defense in name only. Like, as in, most of that role, I think, will be the DOD carrying on operating with the command structure that's already in place. Now, Adam Kinzinger talks about this. He says, given that this is Hegseth's third tweet about this, it's obvious that the Pentagon is running the Department of Defense and Hegseth is doing little pet projects and busy work. That's good, at least. So Adam Kinzinger is saying, that's great. You go and change your name of little bases over there, and we'll keep doing the adult stuff over here. I don't know whether that's actually what's happening. Now, some serious people from Trump's team will visit Ukraine this week, according to Zelensky. So Zelensky saying, serious people from the United States are due to come over. Now, Zelensky said there are voices which say that Europe could offer security guarantees without the Americans. And this is kind of going back to what Tatrugami was talking about. And Zelensky, however, said, and I always say no, security guarantees without America are not real security guarantees. Now, this is Shashank Joshi picking that out of the Guardian article. And before I go on to what Shashank Joshi continues to say, this is, I think, Zelensky trying to be careful, because I wouldn't say he 100% needs America or the US, but it would really bloody help if they were part of security guarantees. If NATO's not going to happen, then he needs bilateral security guarantees. But realistically, they're not going to come from the US, sadly enough. And the US has said it has to come from Europe anyway. So Joshi says, an understandable position, which I agree, though if for whatever reason the US declines to provide guarantees, then this sort of signalling could put Ukraine in an even weaker position. Well, yeah, absolutely. But, needs must. I personally think that those security guarantees are going to have to come from European nations. With the direction of travel the US seems irreversibly on. Trump may start ignoring Ukraine if Kyiv takes a tough negotiation stance, if he feels Putin is winning the war, if the Russian president publicly rejects his peace plan, or if Russia launches a major offensive during talks, according to a comment is free piece by Christopher Chivis from the Carnegie Institute for Endowment, isn't it? Where are you? Carnegie Endowments, American Statecraft. Program. So Christopher Chivis, let's actually read through this, because I think it is good to get a sense of what's going on. So, or what some people think about the peace process. So amid the maelstrom of executive orders, appointments, tariffs, threats, and other initiatives of the last few weeks, Trump is still promising to negotiate a rapid end to the war in Ukraine. And on Friday, said he had already spoken to Putin about it. It's the right thing to do, and he has a workable strategy, but getting there will be tough. The stakes are high, and if he fails, the war will get even more deadly, especially if he adopts a strategy of malign neglect towards Ukraine, or, God forbid, attacks Russian forces directly. The war has devastated both countries' economies, armies, and populations. Estimates put the death toll in the hundreds of thousands. Ukraine's population has fallen by a quarter, 10 million people, since Russia's invasion. This is a stalemate, a protracted and bloody conflict that needs to end, the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio recently acknowledged. Trump needs to convince the key parties to come to the table and then hash out a deal. The tragic situation that Ukraine is facing makes Kyiv more open to negotiations than at any time since the last attempt broke off in the spring of 2022, but other parties may take more work, starting with Russia. Quote, I have to speak to President Putin, Trump said on January the 20th, when asked about his plan to end the war. And he's right. This is the only way to end the bloodshed, to get Moscow to the table and engage in serious negotiations. However, Trump needs leverage. Towards that end, he has threatened Russia with tougher economic sanctions and pursued a gambit to drain Putin's war chest by driving down the price of oil. And remember, that's all he's done so far. And he's not done any extra sanctions. He's sanctioned the EU. He's sanctioned other nations or threatened them, Canada and Mexico, but not Russia. So really, the Trump administration has done zero to put pressure on Russia. Zero. And actually, all the pressure is on Ukraine. They've put all the pressure on Ukraine. So I go back to people who love a bit of Trump and say, and also support Ukraine, and say, what is this telling you? Yes. So Trump needs leverage. Towards that end, he threatened Russia with, putting down the price of oil and sanctions, although he's done neither. At the same time, he's also offered sweeteners in the form of sanctions relief in exchange for cooperation on peace. So instead of threatening he has threatened sanctions loosely, but instead of actually putting extra sanctions on, he said, we could lift them. So he's given very much the carrot as well as the stick there. Interestingly, Trump wants China to play a role in the negotiations. This is a smart move. China has supported Russia's war effort and has influence over the Kremlin. Beijing has, moreover, said it wants the war to end. But the idea does seem at odds with the anti-China outlook of some of the Trump administration, including Rubio, Trump's top diplomat. It could founder on that reason alone. Trump will also have to persuade the US allies in Europe to back the peace initiative. Otherwise, some of them might undermine his efforts. Many European capitals recognise that the settlement of the war would be in their interest, but they have so strongly backed Ukraine that it may be hard for them to support diplomacy, especially if it means an unsatisfying settlement for Ukraine. Key figures such as Kaja Kallas, the EU High Representative for Foreign and Security Policy, may also be sceptical about the idea, judging from their positions on the war to date. If Trump does succeed in getting all of these parties to the table, he will then have to wade through a bog of contentious issues. For one, there is a foundational question of what Ukraine's future strategic orientation will be: neutral, Western oriented, or some hybrid of the two. Russia may not accept a ceasefire if it means accepting Ukraine's eventual westward orientation. Ukraine may fight any deal that does not offer hope of the same. Ukraine is also sure to reject any agreement that does not include some type of security guarantee against a future Russian attack. There are various ways to provide that guarantee, ranging from bringing Ukraine into NATO, to offering it multinational protection force, to simply promising to redouble military assistance to Kyiv if Russia attacks it again. Settling on the best option will be contentious, however, because Europe, the US, Ukraine and Russia all disagree over which option is best. Meanwhile, several other sticky issues, for instance, the status of the Ukrainians living in the Russian-occupied territories, the status of those territories themselves, and Russia's long-standing but unrealistic demands for a far-reaching overhaul of Europe's security architecture, will require Trump to deploy much diplomatic agility to get to the deal. I don't know that certainly he has that in him. He might have a team that's better, but Trump is no great negotiator. Whether the US president has the patience to see this enormously complex and challenging diplomatic task through is far from certain. Trump might instead slide into a policy of malign neglect towards Ukraine, especially if Kyiv adopts a hardline bargaining position, or if he senses that Putin is winning the war and Trump wants to avoid hitching his cart to a losing horse. In this case, Trump could lambast Russia for the violence and yet do little to stop its forces from pulverizing the rest of Ukraine. I don't think that could happen, but as in, I don't think Russia has the ability to do that pulverization because of the lack of troops and equipment, depending on how much North Korea helps them. But I think this idea that the US could hang Ukraine out to dry, I think is quite possible. An even greater threat looms if Trump does negotiate and then loses face to Putin. For instance, if Putin publicly rejected his peace plan or conducted a major offensive amid negotiations. Trump did not hesitate to order the killing of Iran's top general Qasem Soleimani in 2020, and it's not a stretch to imagine that he might use force against Russians in Ukraine if his credibility were on the line. This could unleash uncontrolled escalation from both nuclear powers. I don't know that would happen. Whether the history of this tragic war will now turn down the path of negotiations will be decided during the next month or two. Trump has envisioned a ceasefire within that time, but that is unlikely. Nevertheless, it should become evident whether the new administration is serious about starting a diplomatic spade work that a successful attempt at peace will require. We should all hope they are. It's long since time to end this war for the US's sake, for Ukraine's sake, and for the world's. I'd have been a little bit more, obviously, pro-Ukraine in there and just demanding that there be a just and sustainable peace for Ukraine. But yeah, it's all crazy. Now, the crazy world that we live in, as Mehdi Hassan says, we are living in idiocracy. This is Scott McFarlane reporting that Representative Earl Carter, a Republican from Georgia, introduces legislation, quote, authorizing President Trump to acquire Greenland and renaming it Red, White and Blue Land. That is literally the times we are living in. Like, these guys are not serious at governing. It is pathetic. Absolutely pathetic. Just grow up, for God's sake. Now, Tristan Snell says Elon Musk has been attacking USAID, we already know, because USAID has been investigating Musk. So a little bit more detail on this. Why? Because USAID paid for the Starlink units Musk claimed to give Ukraine in 2022. Some ended up with Russia, so USAID opened an inquiry. Meanwhile, Musk started speaking to Putin in late 2022. And then we hear here, Elon Musk received millions from USAID. Remember, Musk said sending 5,000 Starlink terminals to Ukraine. He didn't mention it was USAID paying him millions for the terminals. Using International Internet Project Fund, he's pocketed millions from USAID. And that could well be why he closed USAID down, because of that coming out. Like, everyone's, oh, he's so kind at the beginning of the war. It turns out USAID was bankrolling that. And then they put an investigation into that whole process. And then just before that investigation gets a foothold, the entire organisation gets shut down. Guess which top Trump advisor took USAID money? And of course, it's Elon Musk. That's a report in the New Republic. So there you go. Goodness. Right, now, the European Union's lending arm, the European Investment Bank, as I reported earlier, has signed agreements to mobilise close to €1 billion in investments to Ukraine as the US moves to cut funding to development projects in the country. This is looking more and more like this will be Europe's war, and if it is Europe's war, then the US should not be able to help themselves to Ukrainian rare earth metals, and they just need to leave it up to Europe to do. As far as kind of bilateral peacemaking deals between the US and Russia without Ukraine and without Europe, I think, it's going to be fascinating to see how Europe positions themselves, especially when you have the added complexity of a trade war with the US. Like, how is that going to get in a way of the US and the EU working together for Ukraine's benefit? Now, Macron, as I reported yesterday, said, look, stop with this trade war. And he was excellent here, Macron. He said, look, you've got more important things to concern yourself with: the war in Ukraine and indeed China. That's what you need to do. And Macron's exactly right. And he knows that Ukraine is the world's most pressing concern right now. Now, talking about USAID, China is wasting no time in moving into everything abandoned by USAID. So there's lots of reports coming out about this. And again, like I said, over the last few days, the US is committing political suicide, geopolitical suicide. And in that power vacuum where, there was once USAID, the CIA, Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Liberty. And as I said yesterday, there are rumours that every single CIA member in Ukraine, operating in Ukraine, has been replaced or taken back. We are looking at the US just shooting itself in the foot, committing political harakiri. So the gift to China and Russia is immeasurable. By removing US soft power, it's inevitable that hard military confrontations are coming, says Jay in Kiev. And this is Bonnie Glazer saying, quote, China is already reaching out to partners, said Francisco Benzcosme, who served as USAID's China policy lead during the Biden administration. Quote, they will fill in the void in places like Cambodia and Nepal and those are just the places we know about. Indeed, there's more on this. So China's Nicole Perlroth says China's entire Belt and Road Initiative was built to copy US soft power efforts like USAID. Now it will supplant it. China plays the long game. Pulling USAID in the most gutting ways possible is not just starving people of meds and food. It's a gift to the Chinese Communist Party. Never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake. Beijing assumes that Washington's own policies will dismantle the foundations of US global hegemony. Exactly what I've been saying now for a week. China's top priority then is simply to weather the storm. And a quote here from an article, yet Chinese leaders remain confident that even if the country's economy suffers, 4 years of Trump is unlikely to send it into a full-blown crisis. And they anticipate that if Trump follows through on his declared policies, such as those on trade and territorial expansion, he could do severe damage to the United States' credibility and global leadership. Beijing thus sees Trump's second term as a potential opportunity for China to expand its influence farther and faster. In this view, competition with the United States is not in itself the driving force behind China's grand strategy. It is instead one component of a larger process, China's rise and displacement of the United States as the world's leading superpower. What Xi often describes as, quote, changes unseen in a century, Beijing assumes that Washington's own policies will dismantle the foundations of US global hegemony, even if it creates a lot of turbulence for other countries in the process. China's top priority then is simply to weather the storm. Exactly right. And I think, this is if I was China, like, honestly, like, I'm not being anti-Trump here. Like, China and Russia must be freaking laughing at the moment. This is like, it's like the chaos that is going on in the US political landscape at the moment. But then all the allies of the US are being attacked by the US. Even Australia, which is a big exporter of steel, aluminium, I think, or steel to the US, everyone's getting a trade war on them, and Ukraine is not being helped. In fact, Ukraine is being pressured more than Russia is. They're laughing, China and Russia. And indeed, Politico is reporting that as USAID retreats, China pounces. In Nepal, Beijing is signaling it was willing to step in to replace the void. In the Cook Islands, warnings that the vacuum will give an opening for China. In Colombia, China is already interested in filling the NGO gap. And Colombia, of course, was where the US has already been flexing. Quote, China is quickly making moves to fill gaps left behind by the Trump administration's abrupt moves to almost entirely halt and wind down USAID operations worldwide, from the Indo-Pacific to South America. Absolutely incredible. What else? Now, Russia, on the other hand, records its worst ever ranking in the key corruption index. So they ranked 154th out of 180 countries in the new Transparency International's 2024 Corruption Perceptions Index, marking its worst performance in the index's history. The organisation reported on the 11th, today that is. And there you go. Incredible that people accuse Ukraine of rank corruption and don't mention that Russia is in the corrupt position it is in. Also, Hungary remains the EU's most corrupt country according to the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index. It ranked 82nd globally, dropping further. This marks the third year in a row Hungary finished last among EU members. We're tied with Burkina Faso and Cuba, says Shebolts Pani, who's just released a documentary on Orban and his corruption and his kleptocracy and his family's wealth. Okay, we are hearing that Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico is saying we can cut off gas supplies to Ukraine through Slovakia, gas without which Ukraine will freeze. Robert Fico is not a fan of Ukraine, and he is letting it be known. And also, along the same kind of lines, Hungarian Deputy Foreign Minister has arrived in Kiev amid allegations of an alleged slander campaign against Budapest. He claims that Hungarian intelligence services have recorded a campaign allegedly aimed at undermining the international image of Orban. I I don't know that you need a campaign to do that. You just look at the data. According to him, if Kiev is indeed financing actions aimed at discrediting the Hungarian government, this can be regarded as a stab in the back. The politician threatened that in the absence of explanations from Ukraine, Hungary may take tough measures in response. Unbelievable. But there you go. That's the geopolitical news. Quite a lot today. There's a lot of discussion concerning what the US's posturing is. But simply put, the US is posturing more against Ukraine than against Russia at the moment. And you know, I'll be that meme sat at the table with a poster at the front. Prove me wrong. Convince me otherwise. Show me where someone in the Trump administration, particularly Trump himself, have been rhetorically very, very strong against Russia. Show me that. Please show me, because I've not seen it or heard it. When Pete Hegseth can't even say the word Russia. When Trump is harsher against Ukraine than against Russia. Putting like more sanctions. Trump has put more sanctions against Ukraine than he has against Russia since he's come into power. And I'll leave you with that. Goodbye.